So you push.
Good morning. Thank you all for joining us today. If I have not yet met you, my name is Lori Singleton. I'm President CEO for Arizona Forward. And today we're happy to have our first Energy and Climate Issue Committee that you've all agreed to kind of join us. And if you're interested in joining the committee, we'll be sending out an email right after this webinar asking you to sign up. And if you're interested in knowing more about what we're up to these days at Arizona Forward, I'd be happy to talk to you. But I think now I will let Kelly Barr, who is one of the co-chairs of this committee, take it from here. Kelly.
Terrific. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. Welcome. We are thrilled to host this new committee. And I'm going to introduce my co-chair, Sarah Demery, and have her say a few words before we kick it off.
Thanks, Kelly. Hello, everyone. Really excited for our conversation the next hour. A little bit about me. I'm Sarah Demery. I'm Assistant Aviation Director and Chief Operating Officer for the City of Phoenix Aviation Department, and also co-chair with Kelly this new committee. So really excited that you've all joined us today. And without further ado, back to Kelly.
All right. I'm very excited about this particular presentation because we all know that in order to decarbonize, we're going to have to start first with the utilities. Utilities decarbonizing their own portfolios is really just essential, foundational to being able to decarbonize the rest of the economy. So we have three fabulous speakers today from the utilities. We have Mike Eugenis from APS, Mike Sheehan from TEP, and Mary Falk from SRP. And what we'd like to do is have each presenter, they're all very involved in resource planning. And so they're going to present their resource plans. That'll take about 10 minutes each. And then we're going to open it up for questions, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. So if you have questions, what we'd like you to do is put those questions in the chat. And when the speaker is done presenting, Sarah Demery will then field the questions from the chat for you, because I think it's hard to keep, we have a lot of people on this call. So it's hard to call on you. So please just put your questions in the chat. So what I'd like to do now is introduce Mike Eugenis. Mike is the manager of the APS Resource Planning Group, which is primarily responsible for the development of the Integrated Resource Plan and supporting generation procurement efforts. Mike has a background in electrical engineering and spent 7 years within the T&D organization at APS prior to leading the Resource Planning Group. He is particularly focused on maintaining reliable service, affordable rates for customers, and integrating more clean energy resources into the grid. I'm going to turn it over to you, Mike.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Let me share my screen here. Just a quick confirmation, everybody can see my slides?
Yes, sir.
All righty. Appreciate you guys having me here today to spend a couple of minutes to speak with you. I'm going to just take a couple of minutes to go through APS's Integrated Resource Plan, which we filed most recently with the Commission last year in November, and just talk through some of the decarbonization goals that we have as a company and the progress and some of the challenges that it relates to those goals as well. APS is the largest utility in Arizona by service area. We cover most of the, more larger cities, metro regions within the state. So we extend all the way from Douglas at the bottom of the state up through Flagstaff, Prescott, Phoenix, Yuma. All of those are within our service territory. It's a good blend of both kind of more dense loads as you kind of think about Phoenix and the amount of customers that are here and different types of businesses, industrial as well as residential customers. And then we do have quite a bit of rural area in our territory as well, where we don't see the same amount of density, and you've got more T&D facilities associated with serving that demand. About 6,000 employees at APS right now, and our peak demand last year was around 8,200 megawatts. And that number is growing precipitously into the future, both from a place to live and from a residential kind of growth perspective, as well as from large businesses. We see quite a bit of interest in folks coming to Arizona and enjoying the sunshine that we have here, and hopefully a reliable and affordable energy grid into the future as well. Our resource strategy is really anchored on these 4 pillars here, and everything we do at APS really kind of revolves around these 4 different things. We're transitioning to an increasingly clean resource mix into the future. APS is already about 50% clean today in our energy mix, a lot of that coming from the Palo Verde nuclear facility. And we're procuring a large amount of renewable resources into the future, and battery energy storage, a clean resource to help us move the energy from times of the day where maybe it's not as necessary on the system to when it is higher value into the future. Affordability is another core component. We realize that as a regulated monopoly, customers don't have a choice in terms of who their electric service provider is. And so it's very important to us to make sure that we maintain affordability in our rates and that we're pursuing projects that bring the most value to our customers. And then everything is kind of centered on reliability for us. We maintain reliable service for many years now. And as we look into the future, this is absolutely kind of a core tenet of our resource plans. And we focus now even more so, not just on reliability for kind of default assumptions, but being more resilient to changing system conditions into the future. And finally, we want to make sure that we're being customer centric, and that we partner with our customers that also provide energy and can provide savings in terms of energy efficiency projects that they can do to their homes as well. APS has a clean energy commitment, which is 100% carbon-free electricity customers by 2050. We have an interim target in 2030, which is 65% clean energy. And then we also plan to exit from our coal-fired generation in 2031. APS has 2 coal facilities that are online today. One of them is actually closing later this year. And then that's the Troy facility, which is up in eastern part or northwestern part of New Mexico, northeast of the valley here. Today, this is what the energy supply looks like. And you can see that this is really evolving rapidly in terms of what are the places that we're citing more energy and what kinds of energy that we're really looking to procure into the future. Even just a couple of years ago, you wouldn't have seen the same number of renewables, certainly not the magnitude of renewables that you do today on this graph or on the chart in front of you. And energy storage is another huge piece of this that we're investing heavily in. You can see that our resources are kind of spread throughout the state, and we do have several resources that come to us from New Mexico as well. Something that we found is that wind quality and the amount of that resource in New Mexico is a little bit higher than what you can find in Arizona. And so we look to continue to be able to cite, those resources and then bring it in either on existing transmission infrastructure, or in the future, we anticipate that there's going to be a need for additional transmission infrastructure to help bring those resources to the load pocket here in Arizona, and especially around the Phoenix area. Something that stands out, I think, on this page is you can see the amount of customer-based resources that we have on our system as well. There's a tremendous amount of energy efficiency and demand response programs, as well as rooftop solar that contributes to our overall portfolio. And these are things that we anticipate will continue to grow going forward, and that APS invests in, especially in terms of our energy efficiency programs and the rebates that we offer, as well as several different kinds of demand response programs that customers can participate in. Really, so this is kind of the baseline that we plan from. And even this, right, has changed so much in the last 5 years, where you didn't have necessarily kind of as big on the renewables, both the solar and wind numbers that you see today. The most notable change, I think, into the future is actually going to be in this energy storage space. APS has a couple hundred megawatts of utility scale energy storage now, but we're going to be investing heavily into this technology going forward, and we'll have several gigawatts of it online, even just in the next 5 or so years. Something that's important to understand is there's kind of 2 problems that we have to solve as a utility. And that's overall energy needs throughout the entire year, which is making sure that there's enough, megawatts on the system on what we call an 8760 basis, which is across every hour of the year. It's the number of hours there is in a typical year. And then we're also interested in being able to cover that most constrained, that critical highest peak hour. And this chart does a good job of kind of explaining how you've got dispatchable resources and several resources on the system that contribute more so during peak times than some others do. Renewables, due to the intermittent nature of them and the fact that we see ourselves peaking slightly later into the future, are starting to have kind of a diminished role here, especially in terms of solar energy. We see kind of, 6 p.m. is kind of the normal peaking hour today, and into the future that changes. And we actually find that resources become more scarce in the future, not necessarily when the system is absolutely peaking, but as you have solar resources come offline is actually when the system kind of struggles to solve the most. And so solar is an incredibly important resource for us. But those energy storage systems going forward are really going to be, I think, crucial in our ability to maintain those hot summer days and making sure that even when the sun goes down and the ACs are still cranking, that we're able to continue to provide that service to customers. Today, this is what our energy looks like. You see quite a bit of it is clean. We're over 50% clean. You see the nuclear category being pretty large chunk of that, and then the renewables. And as we go into the future, we're going to see this renewables category grow incredibly. It's going to completely subsume the coal that it makes up just 15% of our energy today. We're going to see demand side resources continue to contribute quite a bit, as well as some incremental natural gas as well. We found that the natural gas resource is important because we need to be able to dispatch those resources at times when others aren't available. So the thing is like you can't tell the wind the wind will blow. You can't tell the sun to shine at night. And so it's important to, while we have our battery storage resources and we're investigating other storage resources as well into the future, we want to make sure that we also have dispatchable units available to us as well. We see a ton of growth into the future. And so APS really is going to be challenged to meet this. And the way we're doing so is leaning into all kinds of technology. So really everything that we've talked about so far, from renewables, storage, and that incremental natural gas resources. Just to kind of give you an idea of what that growth can look like. If a large grocery store is a megawatt, the data centers that are coming to our service territory, which we see quite a bit of interest in, especially with the recent AI boom, are 200 megawatts kind of on the low end, quite frankly. And you can see on this slide that there's thousands of megawatts of requests that are in our queue today. And that ends up being equivalent to a huge resource profile that we're looking to serve in the future. And just for context, you have Palo Verde, which is in its entirety about 4,000 megawatts, of which APS only has one share of. And so I think that kind of puts into context just the magnitude of the growth that we're seeing, as well as how many resources we're going to have to get into the future. I think this is, kind of the core part of our message, essentially, is that we think that we're going to need to be able to dispatch, additional natural gas and leverage future innovation in the natural gas space in terms of how we're going to make that technology cleaner into the future, whether that's hydrogen or other innovations that we're not aware of today. We're leaning heavily into that solar and energy storage in order to kind of take advantage of the wonderful solar resources that we have available to us in Arizona with the amount of sunshine that we get. And we anticipate into the future that it's going to take additional advancement in nuclear technologies and other baseload resources, which is going to be a crucial component of a overarching portfolio of clean resources. This shows just how we anticipate the demand to change in the future and how we're going to use battery resources to, while during the day when we've got extra renewable energy that's available to us and there's extra kind of sunshine that our customers don't necessarily need, we'll charge those batteries during that time and then discharge over peak times and into the evening as well. And so this shifting load profile is going to be pretty dramatic into the future versus today. You see it as a much more flat profile, or you see those variable resources kind of just taking up a smaller sliver overall of what this looks like. And that's pretty much my presentation today. We only had 10 minutes, and so I wanted to try to keep it pretty concise, and so I'll pause here for any questions.
Thanks, Mike. This is Sarah, and we do have one question. You touched on it a bit in your presentation, but maybe you could expound on it. And I think it might be on the minds of other participants as well, including myself. So this question's from Marty. It says your strategic plan, including clean energy, is clear, but data centers and new level chips will require more power than ever before. How does APS plan to grow the total resource to maybe double in 5 to 7 years?
Yeah, the resources that you can cite and procure in that short time frame are frankly limited. And we don't necessarily have the innovations that we would like to see, especially for some of these future technologies that we think are going to be an important part of the grid in the future. That's one of the reasons why APS is leaning so heavily into solar and storage technologies. And like I said, there's going to be multiple gigawatts of battery energy storage on our system, even in the next handful of years. And the fact that we've found that those projects can actually be built in this time frame, notwithstanding incredible challenges that come from the supply chain and the actual sourcing of these technologies and the batteries themselves and inverters, et cetera. But we hope that into the future too, we'll start to see some easing there. It's a very complicated space too. We're starting to see more interplay and national policy and the tariffs that are being levied on some of the foreign countries that we source these materials from. That's also a challenging dynamic that we have to face in this. And that's why we're leaning into as many different kinds of resources as we can. The idea being, you want to have wind resources, you want to have the solar resources, you want different kinds of batteries in your system. Hopefully we can find other kinds of long-term storage in our system so that if any one technology ends up being either problematic or continues to have supply chain challenges, that you're able to rely on those other resources, provide you a little bit more resiliency on the system.
Sounds good. And our next question was a good lead in to solar. What is the utility role in encouraging more battery storage for distributed solar installations?
Yeah, and we've got a customer to grid solutions team that specializes in this particular area. And so I can't speak well to in terms of like how we do our program setup or what incentives there may be for this into the future. But we count all of our customer resources. And so we recognize the fact that, rooftop solar is a provider of energy to the system. As you can see, like on one of my previous slides, it's a significant amount of our resource mix, quite frankly, comes from rooftop solar. And so having batteries for those customers as well may provide reliability benefits to the individual customer in terms of whether that's kind of T&D related outages and having more resiliency from weather events, but may provide some benefit to the company as well.
Great, thanks. We've got another question that just came in. How can private developers, PPAs, help increase capacity while keeping costs down for APS customers? With rate hikes of 10% the last few years, continued investment into natural gas and Four Corners, can private development be encouraged to bring renewables to the state with limited cost impacts for customers?
Absolutely. And we work with quite a few private developers. Our recent all source RFPs that we've released the last 3 years are almost entirely PPA based, which means power purchase agreement, which is we're working with these developers that have projects that they've already put into the queue and they've done the research on and have found land for them. And we found that many of those projects provide quite a bit of economic value to our customers, are an important part of our resource mix into the future. And so APS is committed to using that all source RFP process going forward, which allows these private bidders to continue to bring their projects forward. And we try to signal, I think, in every way we can, that with the amount of growth that we see, we want more projects to be able to choose from. And so if those developers are able to bring us those good quality projects, we absolutely want to partner with them and have them bring that value to our customers.
All right, thanks. Another question. There has been talk of repurposing natural gas plants for green hydrogen in the future. Has there been any feasibility studies in this as a viable option for APS NG plants in the future?
Yeah, the hydrogen conversation, I think, is still really nascent. I mean, there's a lot of development that's happening in this sphere. I think that there's a lot of innovation that is yet to occur, frankly, in what role hydrogen is going to play in decarbonization and decarbonizing the utility industry. It's something we're definitely hopeful about into the future, but we certainly don't have a lot of great economic data for it today. And what I mean by that is it's difficult to ascertain how much it's going to cost in order to run an electrolyzer to create hydrogen, whether what end is going to end up being the most efficient way of creating hydrogen, whether that's, you know, through the use of renewable energy or other sources, and then ultimately the transportation of it as well is a really big challenge. And so in terms of feasibility, I think there's a lot of unknowns and that we're grappling with. And we also see that there's going to have to be investment in that technology and in more innovation going forward to help solve those issues.
Thank you, Mike. That was our last question. Kelly, back to you.
Perfect, sure. Thank you, Mike. That was really terrific. One of the things I think you'll see as you hear from each one of the presenters today is that all of the utilities have very aggressive carbon reduction goals. And one of the things I've been really impressed with is the fact that they're actually working their plans, right? It's easy sometimes to have an aggressive goal, but not make good progress. And you'll see, I think, from all three of the presenters today, that they're making good progress. I will be asking them at the end a little bit about the major challenges they have to implementing both in the short term and long term. But let's move on now to our next speaker, who is Mike Sheehan. Mike is the Vice President of Fuels, Resource Planning, and Wholesale Marketing at TEP. He has been leading TEP's resource planning team for the last 10 years. For the last decade, he has been a part of the company's transition to reduce its dependence on fossil fuels while moving towards more sustainable resources in a cost-effective and reliable manner. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike. Mike, are you on mute by some chance? Because I can't hear you.
Getting there. I'm gonna make sure you guys can see my screen here. I'm gonna bring it up and all right, how does that look?
Perfect.
All right, well, hey, Kelly, thank you for that introduction. Start off with a little bit of a introduction and give some context to, a little bit of history around some of the joint owned plants between APS, SRP, and TEP, as well as other utilities in the Southwest. From a TEP standpoint, we serve over 450,000 customers in the Tucson metropolitan area. We're about a third the size of SRP and APS. And, back in the 70s and 80s, when these coal plants in northern Arizona were built, a lot of the utilities went as joint ownership arrangements to build not only the plants, but the transmission to the load pockets. So in the 90s, TEP relied heavily on the coal-fired generation to meet the needs of the customers. But if you fast forward to today, you can see that a lot of our new facilities, whether they be solar, wind, or storage, solar in particular is located close to the load pocket near Tucson, whereas our wind resources are located in eastern New Mexico, where the wind production is much better. We see higher outputs of wind on an annual basis from those resources due to the wind in New Mexico. In terms of our strategic planning, the four principles that have provided the framework for all of our IRP decisions over the last several years are these four: reliability, affordability, sustainability, and diversity. First and foremost, reliability is one of the most important planning criteria due to the summer heat that we see here in Arizona. As a result, our 2023 IRP was really focused on building out future capacity to meet summer peak demand. But as we go forward, affordability is a critical issue as well. High inflation, supply chain issues have driven up costs in the recent years. So as we go forward, we have to develop resource plans that do it in a way that don't cause our our consumers rate shock, and we certainly don't want to drive away economic growth as we go forward. And then finally, resource diversity is needed on a longer term basis. While we're currently investing in large volumes of solar and storage, and the storage technologies right now are in the 4 to 8 hour range. As we go forward, we have to look at technologies that energy storage technologies that can cover a 12 to 16 hour period. In terms of our goals, back in 2020, we did set a 80% CO2 reduction target by 2035. And in our latest IRP, we actually set another goal to reach net zero by 2050. While these goals are really driven by our management's team to focus on reducing carbon risk for our customers, it's really these environmental policies that are driving the change. And as a result, utilities have no choice but to consider other forms of alternative generation. And then finally, the Inflation Reduction Act was a real game changer in this in the recent years here to drive, accelerate our plans to actually build out more renewables and energy storage. So just a quick timeline over our resource plan. Our balanced portfolio shows us over the next 15 years developing over 2,000 megawatts of renewables, as well as 1,300 megawatts of storage. Along the bottom portion of the timeline there, you can see the timed retirements around coal. Our next big unit at Springerville is a 387 megawatt unit that we're shutting down in 2027. And then, as you can see, we'll be out of coal by the end of 2032. In the center of the timeline there, you can see the need for new natural gas. And that natural gas is really driven by the fact that currently natural gas is a bridge to fill in the gaps as we shut down these base load coal units. And when you look at the cost comparisons between solar storage and gas, typically the renewable resources with solar are 2 to 3 times the cost. So in order to balance out not only reliability and cost, we had to actually consider new combustion turbines as part of our resource mix going forward. Over the next 15 years, this resource plan will cost about $5.6 billion to implement. And as you can see, I mean, we've been making steady progress since 2020. Even on our CO2 goals, we've reduced CO2 emissions by 32%. And you can see across the board as we go forward with our plans, from carbon dioxide to nitrogen oxide to water consumption, we're going to see about a 70–80% reduction by 2035. So while we are focused on new sustainable resources, one of the ways that we're getting there is by ramping down our coal operations. And one of the strategies we're using is transitioning to seasonal operations. At our Springerville generating station, we're actually scheduling longer maintenance during the shoulder months and trying to run the units only during the summer timeframe when we need that summer capacity. This strategy not only allows us to transition to more renewable and energy storage over time, but it also lets us transition the workforce not only at the power plants, but also at the coal mines. So it's a responsible way to make this transition over a longer term time frame. And then recently around clean energy development, we've actually commissioned over 480 megawatts of new wind and solar projects that went into service in 21 and 22. And recently, over the last year and a half, we've been working to execute new agreements. And so we've put in place contracts to procure over 900 megawatts of new solar and storage. And as you can see, while we own, a portion of the projects, a large portion of the projects are purchase power agreements. And as we go forward, we're going to need not only our projects to be built out by the utility, but we're also looking, to not only project developers, but also behind the meter resources to, solve the load growth as we go forward. And finally, as we move through the energy transition here. You can see, looking at the chart on the left there, the load growth is pretty flat. I mean, we're seeing about a 1 to 2% load growth over time. This was based on the data we had in 2022. But recently with the data centers, that this load growth has significantly picked up, and we're getting, you know, a lot of demand similar to what you saw with APS. And so what we're struggling with is over the next 15 years, we're going to see the capacity on our systems double. And so really what it's going to come down to is, you know, can we build out more transmission and distribution in order to accommodate more renewables as we go forward? And then, you know, this is the way that if we're going to promote economic development, we have to basically, you know, rely on all resources, whether, you know, it's behind the meter, built by the utility, or project developed. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
Thank you, Mike. This is Sarah. We didn't have any specific questions come in. We did have one come in, but it's going to be for all three speakers. So I might hold that one to the end.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kelly, back to you.
All right, making good progress. It is now my pleasure to introduce Mary Falk. Mary is the Director of SRP's Integrated System Planning and Support. In this role, she oversees the integrated planning of SRP's power system. Mary has worked in the utility industry in Arizona for 19 years, managing projects and people in the transmission and distribution field. Mary has a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering from U of A and a Master of Business Administration from the Grand Canyon University. Mary, over to you.
Thank you, Callie. And I should have my screen up so everybody can see. Wonderful. Thank you so much for having us here today. It's a great opportunity for us to get to share our message. This is something that, you know, everybody on this call from the utility side is passionate about. And it's wonderful to have the opportunity to get to share this message with a larger audience. You'll hear a lot of the same themes from me when we talk about what the challenges are that we're facing. We'll talk about load growth. We'll talk about moving towards a more sustainable energy fleet. But I will broaden up the topic a bit in terms of what we're planning for the system beyond just our generation resources. So with that, I'll jump in and start out with our vision and mission. This is really who SRP is and what we do. And the things that I want to call out here are very similar to the themes you heard from APS and TEP. We're trying to balance reliability, affordability, and sustainability, and trying to design a power system and operate a power system that balances those three. And our long-term vision, our 2050 vision, as you can see here, is trying to be able to position SRP to provide both secure water and clean energy that empowers Arizona to thrive for generations to come. With that being our long-term vision, we set these midterm goals we call 2035 goals, and that is really guiding where our company needs to go in that midterm to be able to position ourselves to achieve this long-term vision. And a subset of these goals is our sustainability goals. We just went through a refresh of those 2035 sustainability goals, and I will share those with you. But I want to talk about the process first and share that this is an externally involved process where we pull in advisors and stakeholders within our communities and our customers to help inform and drive what those sustainability goals should look like, as well as broaden it up for a public process to solicit input from all parties. And ultimately, these goals were just approved by our board in March of 2024. So they do look a little different than what was set about 5 years prior. It is a broad and diverse group and very comprehensive group of goals associated with moving SRP towards a more sustainable future. The area that I'm going to focus on today, though, is really that generation carbon piece. And when we talk about the goals specifically, the highlights that I wanted to share here in terms of the differences between our previous goals and what we just updated is we are getting more aggressive with our sustainability objectives. You can see with our carbon reduction, we are moving from a 65% reduction to an 82% reduction in that same time horizon. One thing that I'll note is when we talk about some of the analysis that was completed through our last, what we call integrated system planning effort, that analysis is really driving that more aggressive goal. We feel like with our plans that we have in place, we're going to be able to achieve that 82% reduction. And then tying out to that long-term vision again, that 2050 target is to be able to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Like you heard from my colleague at APS, one of the challenges with not only adjusting our resources to meet our existing demand, we're also seeing significant load growth within our service territory. And there was a great question about data centers coming into our service territory and how are we going to support that load? And so I'll just call out a couple of items here. I won't bore you with a ton of graphs today, I promise, despite my engineering background, but you can see that our average over the last 10 years in terms of load growth has been just over 2% year over year. But that uptick in that blue line last year was a 7.1% increase in demand. So that's what our customers consumed at the hottest part of the day of the year. We exceeded our previous records over and over and over again last year. And not only is that heat, but it's also that growth that we're seeing. And with that green line going forward, that's our forecast. Now we're expecting an average of 3.2% increase. That is significant. That may not seem significant. That is a significant number to try and sustain year over year over year. And that's driving a lot of our decisions. With any type of forecast, it's always wrong, right? And so one of the things that we do, and I'll talk a little bit more about here in a couple of slides, is scenario planning to try and understand that. But with that green bar, that future look, about 2/3 of that growth is estimated to be coming from our large commercial and industrial customers that we expect to come into our service territory. So not only do we have load growth, the demand is increasing. We have these sustainability goals that is driving down the availability of some of our existing resources. And so the highlight here, again, I know it's a graph, but what I want to point out is the distance that's growing between that light blue line and the dark blue line. That is the problem that we're all trying to figure out how to solve. How do we fill that gap to make sure that we can continue to provide reliable and affordable power while meeting our sustainability objectives? So the approach SRP took, and this kicked off several years ago, was to go beyond just planning our resources and to take a look at an integrated system plan. So that looks at not only the resource planning piece, where we're looking at that generation resource, but also what are we going to be doing with our transmission system, our distribution system that gets that energy out to our customers. And then, is there something that we can do beyond just continuing to build out a bigger and bigger system? Can we lean on our customer programs and look for different ways to incentivize and adjust our customer behavior? So this was our first ever integrated system plan that we've completed. It looks at that 2035 time horizon. So I'll talk a little bit about, the approach that we took. I mentioned a forecast, no matter how good it is, it's always wrong. And we want to plan for a number of potential futures. So we looked at 4 major scenarios that include a lot of variability in terms of what that growth could look like, but also what policies could look like in the future, different sensitivities associated with pricing. And so ultimately, over the process of completing an integrated system plan, we evaluated 42 different scenarios, what 42 different system plans could look like for SRP before landing on what we call a balanced system plan. So our go forward, this is our approach for planning where we need to be in the next 10 years. You can see that the big punchline here is that we need more generation resources. So the key highlight here is that we need to basically double, if not triple, the resources that we have on our system today. That includes retiring some of our existing thermal fleet to be able to still achieve that sustainability target. But there's a significant increase in that renewable space. So very similar story as to what you're hearing from APS and TEP. The other thing that I'll mention is that it's not just one solution that's going to get us there. This is really an and strategy. We're looking at solar, we're looking at battery, we're looking at wind. Natural gas is still a part of our portfolio, as well as like APS, Palo Verde Nuclear. Maintaining and upgrading our existing systems that we have today, as well as leaning on things like demand response programs from our customers. I know there was a question about hydrogen as well, so I'll just mention that we also have a team that's looking at future technology and looking at different ways that we can enable and advance that technology and provide more certainty for us to make decisions in the near term to be able to realize those new technologies in the longer term. I'll highlight this quickly. I won't go through all of the details on here, but the piece I want to mention is that we've already been working on this. We've been adding significant resources onto our system to be able to make this transition and support the growth that we're seeing. So as you can see, if that dark blue line, the vertical line, is where we are today, we've made significant efforts to add renewables, and we have a lot already in the works. And you heard things like an all-source RFP. That's something that we're doing now and years ago to be able to get resources on in the 4, 5, 6 year time frame after those all-source RFPs are on the streets. So this takes a lot of pre-work to be able to position the resources in the time horizon that you're looking for. I mentioned beyond just the resource piece, our integrated system plan that we produce has all of these system strategies. It's really an and strategy. We need to be able to look at not only resources, but maintaining our existing infrastructure, looking at evolving our pricing plans to shift customer and consumer behavior to match what we think is that shifting peak that Mike with APS shared, as well as enable our distribution system. So this is a very public process that we went through with the integrated system plan. If you have any questions or want a 170-page document to go through, it's out there, but there's also some summarized information available, as well as some information on our sustainability 2035 goals. With that, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Mary. This is Sarah. I think this question kind of came up about when you showed the graphic with your projections to 2035 for demand. The question is, do you have a sense of how much of that increased demand is due to electrification of vehicles and building? And I'll even throw in future aircraft in the future.
With electrification, so I will say that part of our sustainability goals is being able to enable the adoption of roughly 1 million electric vehicles in that 2035 time horizon, which is significant. I will also add that with our typical electric vehicle growth, it isn't that significant. When we start talking about fleet electrification, that's when it's going to become a really interesting challenge for us to try and solve. And I think that's across the industry as well.
Interesting. Thank you for that. I was kind of wondering that myself. The question that came in for all of our speakers today, I will throw that out there, and then all of our panelists can chime in. Question is, hello, given the unprecedented federal investment in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act in clean hydrogen production and development, as well as hydrogen production projects planned for Arizona to supply clean energy and mobile demand in the CA market. Are there any, sorry, my screen is a little weird and there's a couple words that are obscured. Are there any, that word is missing, any plans for the utilities in Arizona planning to partner with local hydrogen producers in addition to intermittent renewables like wind and solar? And then there's a link to a story of what Xcel Energy is doing for advancing hydrogen technologies.
just because I'm quick with the mute and I was just up, I'll mention that so SRP is actively engaged with trying to understand and progress that technology. We are participants in what they call the Hydrogen Hub effort. So that's evaluating kind of a regional solution for hydrogen. The Inflation Reduction Act, I think, had a kind of a different twist in terms of impact on SRP specifically. It allowed us to be able to look at self-development options for renewables, which we had historically really relied upon our PPA partners to be able to realize so that we can continue to make those affordable. So these policies are significantly changing our approach and our plans for the future. I'm interested to see where hydrogen goes, but I do agree that it's probably going to be a regional decision in terms of trying to make that feasible for Arizona. Open it up to any of my colleagues to join it.
Yeah, Mary, I would say the same thing for TEP. We're following the hydrogen developments, but certainly we see that as a longer term option down the road. And to your point, it is going to be something that is going to be done on a regional level. In terms of the IRA, we were able to take advantage of the tax incentives on 2 battery projects that we're looking at. We're looking at 2 200 megawatt 4-hour storage battery projects here in Arizona, or here in Tucson. And so that was a real game changer for us. And so as we go forward, we'll continue to look at those options. And certainly, it has made a huge reduction on the cost of renewables as well.
Yeah, and I think APS is in a similar situation for the comments that SRP and TEP shared.
Sarah, I have a couple questions, which I will fill time to allow other people to put in their questions in the chat. Obviously, last summer was quite a summer, and I think it was. You guys can tell me off the top of it, more than 50 days of more than 110 degrees. Can you talk a little bit about how the utilities take into account climate change into their planning, the impact of the heat on the grid, as well as the increased load to prepare for summer? Obviously, reliability is really important as we begin the dog days of summer.
I'll take the first swing at this one. So there's a couple of different ways that APS takes into account this. There's in our forecasting method, there's kind of like a base temperature that's a part of our forecast. And when we do forecasting into the future, we want to make sure that we're taking this kind of from a stochastic approach, which means we want to have multiple different scenarios that we're evaluating, and you want to kind of combine them together to get to what we think a realistic future may be, given the fact that like weather is inherently variable. I mean, it's difficult to predict what the temperature is going to be besides hot in the summer, next week, rather, many years into the future. So we've adjusted kind of that core temperature in our planning forecast to better understand, like we're seeing a more consistent number of 117, 118 degree days into the future. That's one of the ways that we're approaching it. We also partnered with a regional consultant called Astrape, who does reliability modeling at a really detailed, really rigorous level. And we incorporated over 20 years of historical weather information in that. And we're able to feed it things like solar profiles during that time. So actuals, load profile actuals, as well as the weather actuals, to get a correlation between, when it's incredibly hot, how likely is it that you're going to have the availability of solar resources into the future as well? Because it's not just about, heat leading to higher loads. It's, do I also have the resources necessary to serve those loads? And when there's cloud cover in the summer and you get a monsoon that rolls in, just how much does the load change when you no longer may have access to some of those resources? And so we incorporated that study work that consultant did for us into the integrated resource plan and into the development of what we call effective load carrying capability, which is the ability of a resource to be counted towards peak loads. And it's a very, like I said, it's a very probabilistic approach to that, like a stochastic approach to it going forward.
Yeah, I would say for TEP, we use, a similar methodology. I mean, we look back how we did things, 10 years ago, we had a planning reserve margin of about 10 to 15%. And, there was a lot of excess generation here in the desert Southwest. Going forward, we've actually, in our latest IRP, bumped up our reserve margin to 16.5%. And I'm sure as we go forward, we'll continue to look at that and potentially make changes. From a day ahead and real time basis, there's been a real focus on, weather data, tracking wildfires, just a lot more real time data has to flow in and to our dispatchers. So they can basically, adjust their plans on a daily real time basis in order to account for these like significant changes in weather, where we would see kind of minor swings in weather. To Mike's point, it's like not only are we seeing the changes in the heat and driving up the load, but the renewables are now, all of a sudden, like here in Tucson today, there's a bunch of dust and it's having an impact on the solar production. So there's just a lot more variables that we're seeing that we have to deal with. And so as we bring on batteries, I'm sure we're going to have to, focus in real time on how they operate and how we make those decisions as well.
I'm not sure I have much to add beyond the common practice there, other than maybe tying back to the scenario planning that we leveraged. So I think being able to consider multiple futures and climate change would definitely be one of those factors. Understanding what it would look like if it continues to get hot, right? We're seeing, I think that last summer impact that we had wasn't just the increased heat and that record heat of the highs, but it wasn't cooling off at night either. And so that does take a toll on our equipment too over time. So just trying to make sure that we're considering a variety of solutions and then landing on what is, the most probable, or having kind of some options teed up for being able to respond to those different futures.
Thank you. We just had a question come in for all three of you. Can any of you speak to your perspectives on potentially joining EDAM or Markets Plus?
We have not joined either market quite yet, and we have a team actively engaged in understanding what would be the best decision for SRP and our customers right now. Ambiguous answer, but that's what I've got for today.
APS is in a very similar position as SRP in this. In general, we think that there's a lot of benefit to the Southwest and being partners with our other utilities that are around here. And what I mean by that is it wouldn't make any sense for APS to pick one market and for SRP to pick another market. So we're coordinating heavily between utilities to make sure that we are able to capture those market benefits in the maximum way we can.
Yeah, definitely echo that same approach. It's going to be a joint effort, I'm sure.
And I think we have time for one question, and it'll be, if I may, Kelly, I've got a question. And it's a different kind of perspective, and it might be on the minds of some of our attendees, but what can some of the, each of you mentioned that you have customer outreach and customer, divisions that are working with your larger customers. Could you dive into that a little bit more, into the specifics of what can your large customers in particular, because to an extent there's an element of unknown, but what can customers do to work with you in their planning efforts moving forward to help with those projections proactively?
I think we look for, it's an inherently really challenging question. And there's a phrase that gets thrown around a lot here at APS. It's kind of similar to, I think, this main, right, of like, you got to figure out who are the pretenders and who are the contenders going forward when it comes to whether there's new customers that are coming in and what their projections may be. But existing customers, I think, play a really big role too. And just being able to communicate and have some amount of firmness, I think, in terms of like what their anticipated expansion plans are into the future and what those loads may look like. The thing is that in the utility, it takes years to develop new resources. The fastest resources that are coming online are 2 to 3 years out. And so we have to make big investments now in order to maintain reliability in the future. And that's not necessarily always how business works in terms of like, if you're planning an expansion to your facility, you know, it may be that you make that decision on a yearly basis of whether or not you're going to do that. And some facilities take over a decade to kind of go through that entire process. So both of those are valid. But I think as we go through this transition, there's just a high premium, I would say, on certainty. On anything that we can do to reduce risk going forward, I think is incredibly helpful for us. And that's because there's just so many sources of uncertainty as we go through this process.
Yeah, I think from the customer side for us, I mean, what we've seen is over the last 5 years, was always about, you know, trying to get a discounted price and, you know, basically building out more, you know, distributed generation and relying on that displacement of energy. Going forward, it's really about capacity. And for us, if we're going to develop programs that give customers the value or discount relative to other commercial customers on our system, it's got to be reliable. We've got to be able to count on it, right? So if customers just want a price discount, it's not going to really work for us. But if they're willing to commit to projects that are firm and interruptible, there is value to be had. It's just, you know, it's something that the utility is going to rely on it. It's got to be there when we need it.
Yeah, and I will just add, I think not only are they going to show up or not show up, but the time frame and being able to firm up those ramp rates and what the load looks like, that is having a significant impact on what our decisions are. And historically, I'll say customers come in with a very optimistic total megawatts that they need, as well as how quickly they'll need it. And often it falls a little short or lags. Being able to get that as accurate as possible, I think, is going to be really helpful for us to plan the system and right size and right time the system that we're building. I think the other thing that we haven't mentioned much, we talked a lot about, you know, generation resources at that macro level, getting that top number to align with demand and resources. But the transmission that we have to build is a long lead time item, and that can be a multi-year process as well to go through the rigor of going through the governance and the public process there too. So that's another thing that I think is going to be the long pole in the tent over time. Even if we're able to move faster with decarbonizing, getting these resources in, getting them connected to our system with transmission is going to continue to be a challenge.
Wonderful. And with that, I think we're at our time, but it's a great segue to welcome you all to this committee as we have had this robust dialogue. I think there's more conversation to be had, and Arizona Forward is very excited, I think, about this emerging committee. If you have interest, please be on the lookout for the follow-up email, and you're welcome to join our committee, as we will welcome the conversation to continue as we can help proactively work as Arizona Forward with industry on some of those solutions in the future. With that, Kelly, any final remarks?
Yeah, I just want to add that our next meeting is August 15th at 10 a.m. So mark your calendars. We'd love to have you. We intend to have cities come and present their climate action plans. So if you're interested in seeing what cities across the state are doing relative to climate action planning, that would be a great opportunity. So that's August 15th at 10 a.m. Thanks for joining us. And thank you so much to our presenters. That was super informative, really interesting. And again, I'm just so impressed with the aggressiveness of your climate action goals and the fact that you are working the plan and that you're making really good progress. So keep it up. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.